I already gave a bit of an introduction about repeat and Peatland Justice, so I won't do much more of that. But the presentation that I'll be giving will be very much related to the Peatland Justice project that we're currently working on, which is this investigation of trade of peat in Europe and the various injustices and justices related to that. Um, and in particular, we are mapping or like we are deep mapping Peatland Justice. So we are creating a number of maps that are both a scientific and an artistic exploration of peat trade, not just in a sort of factual data kind of way, but also in a personal way, historic way, a folkloric way, layering all of these dimensions and aspects of peat trade in Europe together to create a story. So to do that, one of the things we did was attend the Peatland Library in Greifswald just a few weeks ago to do a residency and investigate what's present in there's so many books present there, and already start some preliminary mapping for the Deep Map exhibition, which is really like a project of reimagining Peatland through storytelling, of sparking conversations, and through creating an emotional response that hopefully triggers action for peatlands. And because our focus is the Netherlands and I'm Dutch, my personal focus within that was also the Dutch context, which I think is quite an interesting one since there were Dutch people present in Oud-Stumala as well for draining that peatland. So here's just like a little sneak peek of the Peatland Library. Um, and what is very interesting about the Dutch peatland history is that if you look at the map here, the dark red is peat. The Netherlands used to be like majority peat. It's really a country that wouldn't exist if it weren't for peatlands. And yet to this day, like if I were to ask people around me if they know much about peatlands, like probably they know it only because of me, because I'm really obsessed with peatlands, but they wouldn't have had a clue otherwise. So what I have found very confusing over the last like 5 years of being involved with RE-PEAT is how it's possible that a nation like a nation that has such a rich history of peatland relation can have such little connection with it now. And since the Netherlands is the second world's largest importer of peat in the world, in like the current day and age, there is still a really strong connection to peat, except that the drainage and the destruction of the landscape is happening elsewhere. So then, in order to investigate what it means to have peatland justice in the Dutch context, this historical context of extensive peat draining, I think is very interesting to understand. Um, so to give a little bit of context to this map, there was a really big draining project happening around 1500, so between this 800 after Christ and 1850 after Christ. This is really when like the largest chunk of the Netherlands was drained. So this area here in the west that was drained braced bog actually. So there were sphagnum mosses present, but it sunk quite a bit and it got submerged by seawater. So even though it looks like a fen, it is in fact a bog. Um, and they started um yeah, draining it mostly through extracting the peat and putting it on the land again. So we have like these really big lakes that were created and these like bits of land besides that. But it became very apparent after a few years already that this land was sinking and that this drainage was not a sustainable option. So I find this quite an interesting thing to keep in mind that like back in the days it was already so evident that this is not something that could go on forever. And then through the invention of, for instance, the windmills and the sluices and the dikes, they could intensify drainage and I guess like scale up the time scale of like for how long the land would be available a lot, but still the land subsidence remain an issue. And then around the 1800s, 1900s, a lot of the peatlands in the east of the country were drained as well, and they were rather cut because they were still raised bogs. So it was more like a matter of peat extraction for fuel. Um, And now, the image of the Netherlands that you often see is actually this, which is Polderland, and it's associated with this very idyllic, farmer-esque, cute Dutch way of being. But this, in fact, is well, destroyed peatland. So there's this romanticization of past violence, which people are actually not even aware of, and a lot of attachment and a lot of cultural identity related to this landscape, which we now perceive also as nature. Um, so in order to transition or to transform that, to transition to something else, I think there is some work to be done around maybe like diving more deeply back in time and yeah, investigating actually where this land is coming from and then maybe what it wants to go back to as well. Um, And the book that I actually want to talk about most today is this book, Dredge, Drain, Reclaim by Johan van Veen. The subtitle is The Art of a Nation. This is a book I encountered in the Peatland Library, and it's, in my opinion, the most unhinged way of describing this national pride of mastering water. Like it is almost a caricature. Like it's really, it was for me really, really mind-blowing. And what I find interesting about this book, because it is almost such a caricature, it gives a lot of food for thought for investigating where is this pride coming from, what is it feeding, what kind of colonial and supreme assumptions are underlying this approach to managing water, draining peatlands, not only in the Netherlands, but also abroad. Um, so with the intention of mapping peatland justice in the Netherlands, actually, I wanted to go back in time and see, okay, like what kind of injustices have played out in the past and what does that mean then for a just transition in the present. Um, and the map is not done yet. So right now I'll just present a few bits and pieces from the books that I found quite provocative that I wanted to share with you, and then just like share a few first speculations around that. Um, this is one of the maps that was present in the books, and I found it quite mind-blowing to start with because it is all of the places in Europe only where the Dutch were present to help drain the peatlands. And Aukštumala is here represented as well, but there is, of course, the fence in England. There was a lot going on in Poland. There was some in Sweden, in France, in Italy, and then there's a whole bunch in Russia as well. And this is not even like also the dredging and the dike building. This is only peat and drainage. So it really shows that this obsession with peat drainage was not only confined to national borders, but they really wanted to bring it out into the world. Um, and one thing that I was wondering about was like, to what extent was this also a colonial practice? And I found it quite hard to find answers to that because it wasn't fully clear what the process was of inviting or not inviting these Dutch engineers. There is one theory that actually it would be more local people interested in bringing this peat drainage in because it would go hand in hand with quite a egalitarian socialist way of governance on a local scale, so that people that would have very little power in their current situation would have more power on a drained peatland because everyone has the power to flood someone else's land. So there's this codependency created through peat drainage. The other thing is that states and churches just smelled an opportunity for money because they saw how the Netherlands was able to convert land that wasn't cultivatable into, for instance, fields for livestock or city building. Um, and then the other theory is that it was just like Dutch people that were very eager to go out into the world and show off, I suppose. And what they did say in the book is that often these Dutch people would be exempt from taxes in the places where they were to go to. So probably it was a combination of Dutch people being quite, I don't know, like eager to have this nice and powerful position, but also people in power in these other places wanting to have economic benefit and thus making this kind of deal with them. Um, and like the way that it's described in the book is very prideful. It was very much like, oh, like these noble Dutch people with their wisdom around water, like they're gonna go there and they will not reap the benefits, but they're doing the right thing for society. Like it was, yeah, very intense language, let's just say. And there was some resistance to this. I think the most well-documented example is the Finnish people in England. And this poem was included in the book as well. The Dutchmen have a thirsty soul. The drainers are up on a coil they keep and threaten to drain the kingdom dry. Rightly should we stay here and perish with thirst. To the new world in the moon, away let us go. For if the Dutch colony get thither first, 'tis 1,000 to 1 hut, they'll drain that too. So I don't understand every word per se because I'm not a native English speaker. This ancient English is a bit tricky sometimes, but it was just very clear from this that like the Finnish people were seeing this eagerness, this like hungry, insatiable machine, essentially as a threat to their existence. And then like a little subclause in the book was, yes, there was some resistance, and these people they were like breaking the dikes and sabotaging it at night. But then once everything was like finished, there was nothing but gratitude for the Dutch. So like they really painted this picture of all these like Dutch people that are doing so good work. Um, and like to make it even more absurd, sorry, now I'm rambling a bit, but this guy, Johan van Veen, who wrote the book, he's considered the father of the Delta Werken. We had a huge flood in Zeeland in 1953, and then they built this huge dike construction. So he's actually a national icon. But I think that also is like a really funny combination with this, yeah, this attitude that's just so obvious in this book. Some other paragraphs that really stood out to me were the following. The first one is, if reliance can be placed on old legends, the ability of the Dutch to turn bad land into good was already in evidence before Norman times. So it's also very much linking to this idea of the peatland is a bad land. It is evil. It is inherently um, unuseful and even, like really like evil, I suppose, under some sort of Christian connotation as well, and that then draining the peatland would turn that into something good, which I think is also a kind of logic that you see a lot in excusing colonial behavior and the genocide of people. So you dehumanize something, you put something in the box of something being bad, and that excuses whatever you're doing to it. The other one is in a few generations, they turned these wildernesses into so many paradises, which is also just incredibly unhinged. And then the last one, they had the technique and that they had the technique and knew that their inherited art could help other countries. So there was really this idea of, oh, but we're doing something good. Like it's not our personal greed that's making us go abroad and drain all of these peatlands everywhere. Like it's really like we're doing a service to the world. Um, and I find that quite astonishing that that's like what that was so ingrained in this mindset. And to come back to what I said earlier is it was already so clear, let's say in the 1500s, that the land was subsiding and that drainage was not a durable solution. So to still go out everywhere and propose that as yeah, as a paradise, even though it brought so many issues coming from floods to well, I guess floods is the main one, but also just like this, like constantly having to keep up with the water. So every time you're building something, you already have to think about the next step of how you're going to keep the water out. Um, yeah, like to me, it seems quite um how to say quite sneaky to present this as a solution when you know so well that it's actually not. um then yeah, some final reflections that I wanted to share around this whole sort of like Dutch deep dive that I did was like one thing that I'm wondering a lot about, and at some point I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on it, is like in a world where sea levels are very much rising and where um, some sort of technology around water can help people in certain places stay safe and keep their houses or their farms or whatever dry, how can that be applied in a non-colonial way? Because often now it is done in a very colonial way, and I think techno-optimism probably isn't the way to go, but at the same time, the climate crisis is escalating further and further, and these flood risks are increasing every year. So I think this is kind of like a fine line to walk somehow, and I'm wondering like what would a just transition look like in this regard? Also, what does it mean for the Netherlands to have this very long history of destroying peatlands and now being one of the most responsible players in the peat trade market for the destruction in peatlands, for instance, in the Baltic states? Because surely you can't unlink them entirely. Um, and then, yeah, the last one is around is more like a sort of a general reflection around harm. Like, was it really that they were so sure of themselves that they were doing something good? Or was it also like sort of a story that they were telling themselves to keep like a certain subconscious suppressed? Like I'm really, if I had a time machine, I would want to go back in time and to just ask all of these questions because I can't imagine what that life must have been like. Um, and I feel like there is a lot of need for Dutch people to understand this historical context, because, well, like like also in the Netherlands, the consequences of us living on drained peatlands are going to be more and more felt. Um, but they will be felt all around the world because we went to all of these places to drain the peatlands there as well. So I'm wondering like how that like what kind of just transition should we advocate for with that background knowledge, and how can we bring that background knowledge more to the public? So these are just like a few preliminary reflections. And then the last thing I wanted to share was actually my favorite passage of the book, which is not this one, is the Song of the Dredger. And I'm going to read it out. And I had to laugh so much. And it's about the dredger machine. The song of the dredge, once heard, is hard to forget. Its mighty groaning and ponderous squeaking is full of contentment and tireless joy of work. You can hear it miles away, and it is a sure sign that all is well on board and that much good work is being done. The dredge sings like a skylark, happily, as long as it is in action. When it stops, the sudden silence is like a calamity, the silence of a lost endeavor. Then, as the good-natured machine gets into action again, its peculiar, heavy, slow... Oppa, wacht even. Sorry, I got cold. The good-natured machine gets into action again. Its peculiar, heavy, slow, dissonant chant starts once more, punctuated by the rhythmic or arrhythmic plop plop of the heavy substance falling into the barges. So it's like this really caricatural romanticization of peatland drainage in a machinated way. So yeah, those are some first reflections. I'm looking forward to talking more when we meet in Augustumala. And that's all from my side.